What's going on? I am Josh Taylor. That is Dylan Callaghan-Croley, and we are Penn State rivals. Literally just finished the end of this crazy game. Dylan, we knew it was going to be a close, hard-fought Big Ten matchup on the road at Purdue. It's a night game. It's everything you want out of college football. Obviously, you want to start at the top of this one, but with that crazy ending, what is just your immediate reaction to the not only just the game-winning drive, but the emotional roller coaster that was Penn State at Purdue?
I think the best way to call this win for Penn State is gutsy. I mean, going into his final two drives, the final offensive drive for Penn State and the final defensive drive, there was nothing that made you think that Penn State was going to find a way to win that game offensively. I mean, going back to the beginning of the fourth quarter, Penn State obviously gets that big stop defensively, forces a punt. The offense takes over, and Sean Clifford, who was having a really solid game through the first 3.5 quarters, inexplicably overthrows Mitchell Tinsley by 15, 20 yards and results in a pick six for Purdue. And at that point, Purdue had all the momentum, and the offense came back out, had no rhythm. Clifford was obviously rattled a bit. It just seemed Penn State had no shot of really putting together a drive there in their last drive, going to their last drive. But 8 plays, 80 yards in just 57 seconds. It was one of the more impressive drives I've seen out of Sean Clifford during his time at Penn State. And I mean, that last defensive drive, the pass rush, which was non-existent for the first 58 minutes of this game, comes up big with 2 sacks.
Yeah, Chop Robinson. I mean, Coach Franklin said himself, like he might not be a starter, but expect this guy's going to have an immediate impact on the defense, and then literally seals the first game of the season with a sack, the transfer from Maryland. Let's just talk about, first off, how this game started with Franklin really was, in my opinion, a good idea. Like he wanted to establish the run, didn't want to get too, cute with throwing the ball with Sean Clifford, just even though Sean Clifford has the experience, this is his, 6 years, this is his final dance. It's an emotional thing for him. First, this is his last season opener at Penn State. So you kind of just get things going on the ground, mixed in the running backs. What did you really think about that approach, not to just rush into a hostile environment?
Yeah, I thought that was a smart approach by Franklin and Yursich. Last year the rushing game was to a point non-existent for the Nittany Lions,
Oh,
and
it was bad.
they he never said it this year that the offensive line was going to be improved, but he said we'll let them prove it on the field. We can talk about the offensive line later, but early on in the game, they really wanted to establish that run game, and the offensive line looked decent. Now, Kevon Lee had his struggles. I mean, he is obviously not the most explosive running back, but I think you saw the potential in the run game once Nick Singleton and Katron Allen really started getting involved in that offense in the second and third offensive drives. I think it was a solid game plan by Penn State to get the run game involved early and try to establish a run game. It still ended up struggling throughout the game, but I think it's kind of a building block thing. There's some positives to take away from this one early with the rushing game, and you build upon those going forward. And I think it was good just to get. I mean, as a 6-year quarterback, Clifford shouldn't be somebody who gets rattled going into these environments early on. But it's always good to get your quarterback comfortable and just let him get into the game slowly, unless you're Purdue who wants to throw the ball 50, 60 times a game.
Literally 60 times, which is like we knew that was going to happen. I don't think that was any
Yeah.
surprise to anyone that Aidan O'Connell threw it that much. But, going back to the running game, you have to remember, this is literally Singleton and Katron Allen's first time ever in college football. This is their first game ever. We saw Nicholas Singleton starting back there in the end zone, returning the opening kickoff. Yes, he's the top running back in his class, but still, this is, once again, you're on the road, Big Ten, night game. This is the big stage for a freshman coming into Penn State. So I thought,
Yeah.
the home run ability, and this is something I've talked about a couple times on the channel, is the home run plays in the running game did not exist with Kane and Lee last year. It was like the average was like 2.5 to 3 yards total for the year, like per rush, which is not good. That Saquon Barkley-esque, I mean, even like Miles Sanders, like those big time runs were not there last year. So I think you
Yeah.
see the immediate juice with Singleton and Kaytron Allen. We were talking about him a little bit during the game. It wasn't really too much there, but how do you think Singleton and Kaytron Allen did? All three running backs pretty much had 30 yards. So it was a pretty balanced attack, but just do you see like a noticeable difference when they're all three running the ball?
Yeah, and to those watching on YouTube, I do apologize for looking over. I have my second screen with all the stats,
I got
um,
three screens right now, so we're good.
but yeah, I mean, you look at Katron Allen and Nick Singleton's, stat lines, and they're not going to jump out to you. Allen was 8 for 31, long of 9 yards, 3.9 average. Singleton 9 for 20, 9 for 22, long of 6, 2.4 average. Neither one's going to stand out, but I think you saw the flashes out of them. Um, Kevon Lee is a solid running back. For what he did last year with Penn State's offensive line in front of him, I think was probably as much as you could ask for. But he just isn't a running back who hits holes quickly. He doesn't have that explosiveness to his game. He's not a very agile running back. But Nick Singleton and Kevon Lee have that explosiveness to their game. And they didn't really get a show in this one because as this game went on, Penn State's offensive line kind of struggled more and more.
Yeah,
But I mean, I think you go back and look at the first carry for Nick Singleton. He was probably a split second away from taking his
that
first
middle
carry
of the
90.
field was
It was
open.
96, 97 yards for a touchdown. He ended up getting, I think it may have been 6 yards on that, but his ability just to explode through the hole and get into that second level of defense is going to pay off big time for Penn State this year, as long as that offensive line can start to consistently get off the line and push opposing defensive linemen. Um, but yeah, they add such a different dynamic to this Penn State offense, which I think is going to pay big dividends for Sean Clifford in the passing game, because Purdue, for the most part of this game, didn't have to respect Penn State's rushing attack. They're able to, uh, just kind of sit back in coverage and let Sean Clifford throw to them, because Penn State's offensive line wasn't able to do much with their run blocking.
Yeah,
So I think as the season goes, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, Purdue's defense was really just like clog up the middle of the field because there's a very high chance Clifford's gonna look across the middle of the field, check down something kind of safe, or if they do run the ball, you're right there, like to close the gap.
Yep,
But
exactly.
like you said, like having like one of these that one run absolutely had a chance of going to the house. It's going to happen like soon. Like it could be the
Yep.
next game. It could be the next one.
Yeah.
It's like a ticking clock. One of them is just going to take off.
Yeah. And it's one of the other thing to remember with them is, like you said at the top, two true freshmen, their very first games in a hostile environment, national TV, prime time. Uh, as they get more comfortable with the college game, get more up to speed with the college game, they're going to adapt, I think, very quickly, and you're going to see the success very fast for them. It may not be next week against Ohio, it may not be against Auburn in 2 weeks, but it's going to eventually click. And when it does click for both these guys, it's going to be special to watch for Penn State. And I think the offense at that point will take quite a step up, because when you have those type of running backs, it masks a lot of issues with your offense, and especially on your offensive line.
Yeah, and it didn't help Sean Clifford last year at all. You saw so many. I mean, even with the injury, I mean, we'll talk about him getting hurt this game. It looked like for a
Yeah,
little bit, got his leg rolled up pretty bad.
yeah,
He looked fine, like he was playing through it. And then right after halftime, you noticed Purdue got the ball first, but then you saw Drew Allar. Obviously, that's going to be the big talk because even people on Twitter, not Penn State wise, that I follow, like in the draft community, recruiting wise, that people like they know who Drew is. That 5-star status,
yeah.
it's there. He's the future. You want to play him. What do you think of what you saw, the little sample of Drew Allar in his first game?
I thought if you're a Penn State fan, you have to be really happy with what you saw. I mean, 2 for 4, 26 yards, but he threw a beautiful and perfect pass to
Was it
Tyler
Warren?
Warren.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Tyler Warren. Um, And Warren should have got it. He dropped it. That was a big issue for Penn State today, was the drops.
Yeah. Him and Keandre
The
Lambert
official,
Smith both.
Yeah, the official count, according to the stat broadcast, was only 3 drops, but I feel like you could possibly go upwards of 6 drops for
Yeah.
Penn State in this game. Um, and yeah, I think for Allar, what you saw out of him, you have to like, because I think he will give Penn State a chance if Sean Clifford goes down at some point this season. And from what we saw in the blue white game, which was he looked like a true freshman in obviously a glorified practice, but he looked like a true freshman making some freshman mistakes, maybe a little over anxious, but for the situation he came into on Thursday night in that
Yeah.
second half, first drive of the second half, I think he looked calm, poised, collected. All his throws were on point except his last one, which, uh,
It's like a rocket kind of.
yeah, he's not going to be perfect, obviously, as a true freshman, but uh, there will be some growing pains. But for the most part, I think he was pretty damn good.
I liked how they showed right when Purdue's drive was almost over, they kind of moved the camera over to Drew, and he was just smiling, laughing, like he knew he was about to go in, like he was loose. He wasn't like, serious face. He's like, I'm about to go out there and have some fun. This is what I'm excited for. This is what
Yeah,
made Franklin saying he is the backup so important. Why a lot of people were like, okay, like if something does happen like this, because Clifford, does have the
yeah,
injury history, he has the brace on his knee, like it's there.
yeah,
So if the opportunity presents
yeah.
itself, and boom, the first game of the season, the opportunity showed up. So,
Absolutely. There was a lot of questions after he was named the backup quarterback. Was, well, if Clifford goes down for some reason against Purdue, do we actually believe Allar is going to be the one to go out there? And there was no second guessing it. He was the backup quarterback today, and he performed admirably in his very brief stint. And I think it's going to be a brief stint that Penn State fans look back on. And while obviously I think a healthy Sean Clifford right now probably gives them the best chance to win. Clifford obviously had a very up and down game today.
it's crazy.
Uh, the 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 future is bright with Drew, and I think he will give Penn State a chance to win if his number is called again this year.
The crazy thing is, if Sean Clifford doesn't go on that final drive to score and win the game, people are going to remember the pick six and almost throwing another interception on that last drive before the game winning drive. And they're going to be like, no, we need Drew Allar to come in immediately. But since he did like that one drive, I think obviously I agree with you. I think he does give you the best chance to win because you see the grit, the
Yeah,
passion, just how he just gives everything he has every single game. And Drew Allar's going to come in and make mistakes. So even when he does start, I don't want fans to be like, oh, what's wrong with this guy? He was a 5-star. Our coaches aren't, producing our guys the right way. Like, no, like people aren't perfect. It's not Pat Mahomes,
no,
like every single quarterback. So, and I still think Penn State fans are going to say, I still want Allar to start next week, or I want him to get some time against the Ohio team, not the best, obviously, just to get those
yeah,
reps. And I think like he'll get a good chance in the second half if Penn State is up big, but still pump the brakes. Let Sean Clifford, like he gutted it out. Game winning drive. You talked about it. I mean, Joel Klatt and them, Gus Johnson was saying like that was one of the most impressive drives they've ever seen by a quarterback. Just how
yeah.
much it really meant in that hostile environment. So pump the brakes. I can't wait to see Drew too. I love what I saw. That arm is ridiculous. He's going to be special. But still, don't be the team. Don't be Michigan, where you're trying to figure out which quarterback you're going to go along the way.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like you said, if Clifford doesn't have that final drive, the conversation we're having right now is probably quite different.
Oh,
Because
different.
we
We're talking about an
probably,
ugly
I mean,
loss.
yeah, and I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I thought going into that final drive that it was probably going to be much like the 2 drives we saw before that, a rattled Clifford with showing very well, throwing very inaccurate passes, possibly a interception. But instead, Clifford went out there and he didn't really make any super impressive throw in that drive, but uh, they were all good throws. He wasn't inaccurate on the drive. And yeah, it totally changed the conversation here because if he doesn't have that drive, we're probably talking right now, does Drew Allar give Penn State the best chance of winning? And I mean, that still may be the case. It's hard to say without seeing what Drew can do for a long period of time. But a healthy Clifford, we know what his ceiling is and what Penn State's ceiling is with him. And I think if Penn State's defense can improve as the season goes on, we're talking about a team that's 9-3, maybe 10-2. It really depends on how the defense does. But also, we know that Clifford is also usually once per game or once every other game due for a couple bad mistakes, whether it's an interception or some bad overthrows, underthrows, whatever it may be. He's going to have his flaws. It's at the end of the day for Penn State and James Franklin. Would you rather go with the quarterback who's ceiling you know what you're going to get every week, or would you rather go with Drew where there's going to be more, struggles probably as a freshman, but you give him valuable playing time. But
In the end,
I
it's going
think
to be
right
worth
now,
it.
yeah, and I think right now Clifford, unless Penn State, drops 3-4 games in a row, and the
Then you just
season
go all
is,
in.
yeah.
Yeah.
But until then, I think you have to ride with Clifford because I I don't know if Drew makes that drive at the end of the game because that's a big
Yeah.
stage. Clifford's been in that situation before, and he showed his 6-year quarterback experience and poise there on that final drive.
Yeah, and you see the throw to Britton Strange before the half, that kind of fade away. That kind of reminded me of a Pat Mahomes, like same passing motion and everything. Like I'm not trying to
Yeah,
compare it to Pat Mahomes, but just like the mechanics of it, the footwork, everything was spot on. Dropped it right in there. Then of course you see the big play by Strange afterwards. Huge playmakers all over the place. But also you don't know. This is the last thing I'll say about the quarterbacks, and we'll talk about some of these other guys.
sure,
You just
sure.
you just don't know that the exact health of how Sean Clifford was the whole rest of the game
Yeah,
after that.
yes. I
Like
was just gonna say that.
planning on your foot like that, especially like I know your back foot being a right-handed thrower, like that's huge. But like the
Yep.
torque and everything you get off that front foot is huge. If you're not planning right, your throwing motions off by just a little bit, it can make all the difference in the world, which could have been why
Yeah.
he threw it on that pick six. So you just don't know.
Ab- Absolutely. I mean, when he threw the pick six and the drive afterwards, and perhaps even the drive after that, some of those incompletions, he just didn't look right. Uh, that his front leg, which I guess would be his left leg,
Yeah.
um, which he took the hit on, just I don't want to say he seemed ginger on it, but he just didn't seem right. So who knows how healthy he is going into next week's game against Ohio. Um,
That's something. Yeah,
but
you might see Drew for the
th-
whole game if he's not healthy, anyways.
yeah, but at the end of the day, uh, whether he's banged up a lot, whether he was just going through a stinger for a while or what, at the end of the day, he had the poise to make a huge final drive to win this game, and not to mention those 6 drops or 3, whatever you want to call it. I think it was closer to 6. If he completes those passes, we're talking about 26 37, upwards of maybe 350 yards to go along with his 4 touchdowns and 1 reception, despite the really ugly, quarter and a half of play in the third and fourth quarter. He still put together a very good game here on Thursday night.
Yeah, I agree. And they say like wins aren't a quarterback stat. Like this isn't baseball, but game-winning drives like sure as hell help you out if you're a quarterback. Like I'll take that
Yeah.
all day long. And it was against a really stout, experienced secondary, especially the linebacker core with
Yeah.
Jalen Graham. So they got studs all in the back there. What really surprised me. Well, first off, I just want to, pat myself on the back. I said Mitchell Tinsley would be the leading receiver of the game. So you're welcome, guys. I think he's going to lead the team this whole season. I think he looked phenomenal in his first game. Obviously, I had a touchdown, but you see the ability after the catch, something that you saw at Western Kentucky, taking these short screens, slants, little intermediate throws, and being able to break a tackle or two. Huge on the last drive, going up that left sideline there. Obviously going to be a big playmaker for us. Keandre Lambert-Smith, once again, huge. Parker Washington. So the weapons are there regardless of who's at quarterback. But let's talk about the defense.
Sure.
first game by Manny Diaz as defensive coordinator, also coaching the linebackers, which I thought would be the big weak point. I think a lot of people think that the linebacker core is, you see Curtis Jacobs got banged up. He came back. But Purdue's wide receivers, Charlie Jones, one of the two transfers from Iowa, obviously 12 catches, 153 yards, 1 touchdown. And of course, Aidan O'Connell, like stat wise, if you throw 60 times, you should have 350, 360 yards, only 1 touchdown, no interceptions. So that helps out. The running game is a little bit better than I thought it would be, but just what's your overall reaction to what you saw from Manny's defense being the first game? Because I texted you earlier in the week saying, what did you really expect out of this defense? Like, would it be the same, that big package kind of what they did with Brisker? They don't really have that guy, but Hardy pretty much stepped up in that role. He looked great. But what do you think about this defense?
Yeah, this is a really hard one to grade because obviously you did give up 365 passing yards to Aidan O'Connell. But again, 59 attempts in the game. He threw the ball basically 60 times. I mean,
Pretty
how
much
many
playing
times are you
Madden.
yeah, how many times are you going to see that in college football the rest of the year? Maybe a handful of times. Um, I mean that is Texas Tech like numbers a couple of years ago under
Yeah.
Cliff. But yeah, 365 yards, but just an average of 6.2 yards per attempt. I mean, if you're Penn State, you'll take that every single day of the week because you're not getting beat downfield consistently. I mean, they did give up some long receptions, 30, 26, and 23 yards. But at the end of the day, I think the secondary, for the most part, played rather well. I think when they needed big stops, especially down the stretch, they got those big stops. I mean, in the fourth quarter, they put good back-to-back defensive drives.
There's
Joey
a
Porter
whole
Jr.
Joey
had
Porter
some,
Jr. drive, yeah, and then that Hardy
yeah,
deflection on that 3rd and long,
yeah.
huge, massive play.
Now, obviously, Charlie Jones, the transfer from Iowa, had a big game for Purdue, 12 receptions, 153 yards, 1 touchdown, which I guess could be a little concerning that they allowed him to be that consistent, that big of a playmaker in this game. But I also think Purdue had a good game plan going in this one. They thought Penn State would probably have a pretty good pretty good defensive line and pass rush, which they really didn't throughout the
No,
night until the final drive when they racked up 2 sacks. But Aidan O'Connell's game tonight was to get the ball out quickly, and they really killed Penn State with a lot of slants in this one. They would go downfield a little bit, but there was a lot of slants here,
no
really
dink and
taking
dunkers,
advantage of
yeah.
taking advantage of Penn State's weaker linebacker unit, and know that going up man to man on this Penn State secondary wasn't going to be the best case scenario for them because when they had to later in the game, we saw Penn State secondary really take a step up. When it was more zone coverage for Penn State, Purdue was able to do a little bit more digging and dunking into little open areas, especially in the middle of the field. So I think the middle of the field is definitely going to be a major concern for Penn State going forward because you're going to face. I mean, the next few weeks you may be able to survive against Ohio, Auburn. Who knows what to expect out of the Tigers there?
Yeah.
Central Michigan. Central Michigan presents an interesting team because they can put up some points. Northwestern, we'll see.
That's a
But
good one.
over the course of the year, it will be a concern at linebacker. But for the most part, I think there's still a lot of positives to take away from this. Mostly with that, when the secondary needed big stops, they got those big stops. You look at the 365 yards; it's not pretty, but I think you can't just look at this on a stat sheet alone. You have to
No.
go back and
Watch
watch
the whole thing, yeah.
the key drives. It wasn't pretty the first 2 drives of that second half, but as the second half went on, I thought there was good adjustments made. They got some big stops, and it wasn't pretty, but it wasn't horrible either.
Yeah. I mean, no, like I feel like a lot of fans were actually overlooking Purdue. They're like, yeah, they lost David Bell. Who's the other guy? Milton is a guy who was
Yeah, right.
ineligible. They just didn't know about Charlie Jones or Sheffield or Rice or Brock Thompson coming back. I felt like they didn't
Yeah,
have like these huge household names. You don't have a Mitch Tinsley, a Parker Washington, like some of these big media names that you're just thrown out on TV all the time. I knew that they weren't going to run the ball really. I feel like they stuck with Doru a little bit more than they have in the past, especially last year. 15 carries, only 57 yards, but he was in the passing game as well. Very effective. Obviously had 2 touchdowns, kind of just sealing the drives.
I mean, they if you take away the 2.8, sorry, if you take away the 2 sacks for minus 17 yards, they I think averaged about 3.9 yards per carry, which obviously, if Penn State can keep opposing teams to 3.9 yards per carry, they'll take that every day of the week. But this
That's like
isn't
Purdue.
it's a Purdue Russian attack. They haven't averaged 100 yards per
This is in
game
Michigan.
in like a decade. But I think it is going back to the linebacker unit. It was a little bit, I think, concerning that they were able, though, to gain some consistent yardage at times on the ground, especially when they went up the middle. It's the lack of depth at linebacker really showed today, but it's also worth noting that they lost Abdul Carter early in the first quarter to a targeting penalty, and then Curtis Jacobs left the game with an injury as well.
Yeah, and he came back, but still, you could just tell. And if you told me someone on Purdue had 153 yards catching, I would have said it was Payne Durham. I wouldn't have said it'd be one of these outside guys. I'd be like, dang, Payne Durham must be just running like seam routes across the middle of the field against these linebackers. But like, and you know how Penn State's defense has been the last few years. Do you think it's going to be more towards like that 2 linebacker looks, get that third extra DB in there, whether it's a corner or like a big safety, like what they did with Brisker? Or do you think, sometimes you just have to say, hey, we trust our guys to where we can run 3 linebackers if we ever have to, even though they don't really do it too much? Or do you think Manny will change anything after this game?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for the
Because you saw
most part
like
they're gonna
Hardy, Wheatley looks good. Like they got some really good young guys that stepped up.
I think they're gonna mostly stick with the 2 linebacker looks. Because for one, that allows you to keep your least athletic linebackers off the field more. And it kind of forces teams to play into your strength to a degree as well. I mean, against the better Russian teams like Michigan, Ohio
You load
State,
that box.
Minnesota, you're going to want to load the box. But I think for the most part this year, that we're going to see a lot of what we saw tonight, and that's what a Manny Diaz defense is. I mean, that was an aggressive defense all night. Manny Diaz was throwing a ton of blitz looks and packages out there, and they weren't always getting home for Penn State, which was part of the problem with the pass defense. Not that it was bad, but they just allowed Aidan O'Connell to have too much time for most of the night with those blitzes not getting home. I think we'll continue to see that. Manny Diaz is aggressive. He lives for forcing turnovers and creating chaos. So I think we'll see a lot more of what we saw today. There'll be some minor adjustments, but not the major.
Yeah, like you said, they play Ohio next week, so maybe get some opportunities to kind of test some things out. But just taking a look at it to wrap everything up, we said we think, despite the adversity, Sean Clifford's player of the game. Do you think Joey Porter Jr. has a hand in that fumble recovery? A lot of pass breakups.
Yeah, Joey Porter Jr. definitely deserves to be on there. 3 pass breakups, 8 tackles. It's really hard to pick between those. And I mean, Johnny Dixon, I know he had a couple penalties, but he had a nice game as well.
South
3
Carolina
tackles,
transfer. Yep.
a big sack on that final drive that really gave Penn State a ton of momentum. He had 2 pass breakups as well. Keaton Ellis had 3 pass breakups. So I mean, while the stat line doesn't look pretty for the secondary, there's a lot of guys in that secondary who had good games, and of course, Daquan Hardy was one of them. Zakee Wheatley, the turnover king from this spring and fall, had the strip on that fumble that Porter Jr. recovered. So I mean, I think it's Joey Porter Jr. or Sean Clifford, but because of what he did on that final offensive drive, I think you have to give it to Sean Clifford because 20 for 37, 282, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. When we go, if everything for Penn State goes to, I don't want to say plan or well, because that for them, meeting their goals would be winning the Big Ten and all that. But if Penn State goes 10-2 and Sean Clifford puts together a strong season, when we look back at the stat line from this game, we're not going to think about, oh, but he struggled in the third quarter and
No.
early in the fourth quarter. We're just going to look at the stat line and go 20 for 37, 282, 4 touchdowns. That's a pretty good game. Um, Now, maybe the more hardcore fans will be like, yeah, but he struggled here and there. But a casual fan, a casual stat line reader, somebody who didn't watch this game perhaps will look at that stat line and be like, that's a pretty damn good game. So I think you have to give to Clifford because he was a big reason Penn State went up 21-10 early in the game. He did struggle in the middle parts, but at the end of the game, when it mattered the most, he stepped up and delivered a victory for Penn State.
Yeah, I'm going with Clifford. Like you said, stepped up when he needed to. It's not about, how many times you get hit. It's bouncing back and getting that game-winning drive while he's injured. Like,
Yeah.
like we said, like, I don't know what kind of medical, help he got, where all the injury was, but that knee roll-up did not look good. But like you said, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing, not about Clifford, but the wide receiver unit and tight ends obviously weren't perfect today with all the drops. They struggled getting open at times. But I will say when they needed big plays out of this wide receiver room, they got the big plays. I mean, Mitchell Tinsley is another guy who could probably be in that argument for player of the game. 7 for 84, 1 touchdown. Not a mind blowing stat line, but he had a couple big receptions, especially late in the game, like you mentioned. That one reception on the final drive of the game that really set up Penn State to get into that scoring position and eventually the game-winning touchdown. But Lambert Smith had a big, who struggled early on, had a
I feel like
big
he alone
touchdown
had 3
late.
drops.
Yeah, he had a tough game, but he had the big touchdown when it mattered. Brennan Strange, who has gone through quite a bit of adversity with struggles in his career at Penn State, especially catching the ball. At the end of the first half, makes a great catch and then bounces off 2 defenders and goes 67 yards for a touchdown. If it's not for that touchdown, Penn State probably doesn't win this game. Because I mean that 21-10 lead probably gave Penn State just enough to put them in a position late in this game to win. So I mean, when they needed big plays, they got them out of this team. And Kevon Lee, who a lot of Penn State fans didn't want on the field in that final drive, had the game-winning touchdown.
Yeah.
So I mean, a
He
lot of
knew he was
struggles in
open
this
too. He
offense.
was like, please
Yeah,
stop.
a lot of struggles in this offense on Thursday night, but you have to give credit where credit is due. And a lot of players stepped up when needed and made big plays.
Yeah, Lambert Smith struggled dropping the ball, came back, bounced off some guys, made up for it, scored a touchdown. Tyler Warren drops a gorgeous pass by Drew, and then comes back, gets them in that range there to throw it to Kevon Lee for the win. So huge win. Obviously, an emotional roller coaster if the season's like this. Buckle up. But guys, appreciate y'all tuning in. Like we said, Ohio next week, the first game at Penn State, the noon kickoff. I don't care. It's a home game on ABC. They're 1-0, but more importantly, 1-0 in the Big Ten. As always, subscribe to the channel and like. Anything you want to say closing out, Dylan?
I there's a lot I could still say. I appreciate everybody tuning in to
But you do
listen to
have an article you're going to drop tonight with all those thoughts, right?
I do have an article that I'm going to drop tonight, and the PSU 365 podcast. We'll talk more about the game probably later this week. We'll watch for that recap either Sunday night or Monday. But yeah, I mean, if this is how all the games are going to go for Penn State fans, it's going to be a long season, even if they win them all. There's a lot of hard medicine that has to be taken after this one, I think, for some of our older fans. But yeah, a gutsy win for Penn State. If you're a Penn State fan, you're happy with the win. You take it for what it was. It wasn't pretty, but it's a gutsy win. And like you said, you're 1-0 to start the season, 1-0 in the Big Ten. You should have an easier game against Ohio this upcoming week. And then, they get to travel down to Auburn in 2 weeks, which would be a fun game as well.
Jordan Heron. Hate their guts. Anyways, I'm a closet Alabama guy. But no, it's funny because when I was at camp, that's something James Franklin says, like, we're stacking good days. We're stacking good days. Like stacking wins. This is a lot to build off of. You get a lot of positives. There's some negative in there they're going to work on this week. But you got Ohio next week. So, guys, appreciate y'all tuning in. Like I said, subscribe to the channel and head over to pennstate.rivals.com. Subscribe to the website so you can stay up to date on guys like Dylan rating some big things. Of course, class of 24, it's September 1st. Biggest date for that class. Phones are on, notifications going off, text messages. It's football season. This is what it is. Chaos.
Yeah, we're into the heart of football season. It's the best time of the year. And this is a fun way to start it, and it's gonna be a fun fall. Fun
Yeah,
fall.
you get a couple. That's what I like about Thursday games. You get a couple days more to recover from a game like this. But guys, like I said, I'm Josh Taylor, and that is Dylan Callaghan-Croley, and we appreciate y'all tuning in to Penn State Rivals. And subscribe to the channel. We will see y'all with the preview for the Ohio game. Peace.